and welcome. We're in Greenwich today and we're looking at the painted hall, which is one of the most epic interiors in all of London. It was painted in the 18th century and I hope by the end of today you'll know why it's known as the Sistine Chapel of London. I'm Katie, qualified London Blue Badge tourist guide and the founder of Look Up London, which runs public walks and private tours across the capital, specialising in walks for Londoners and London lovers. If you want to find out more about walks, you can look at the link in the description. So Greenwich, there's so much to cover in this whole area. So today we're just looking at one building within it. It is a perfect place if you want a little London day trip. Today we're looking at the Old Royal Naval College, which was built in the late 1680s, basically as a retirement home and a hospital for retired sailors. And it was the plan of the incoming new king and queen, William III and Mary II. And this needs a little bit of context because they weren't normal monarchs. William was a Dutch prince who married the heir to the English, Scottish and Irish throne, Mary II, who was the daughter of King James II. But, she's a woman, and so surely she shouldn't have all the power. And so William agreed to be joint monarchs with her, and this is the first and so far only time this has ever happened in history. So what better way to get people on side than a new charitable venture? Even better if it's an opportunity for a huge amount of royal propaganda, and that's exactly what we have here. Known as the Royal Hospital for Seamen rather than a hospital as we'd understand it today, it was more like a retirement home or almshouse. What would later become the painted hall was supposed to be a dining hall for the naval pensioners, but supposedly they found it a bit too grand while having tea each evening, and so the space was used for ceremonial functions, and the pensioners would give guided tours to members of the public. It closed in 1869 and the building became a training academy for the Royal Navy, and it was in use until the 1990s. But back to the design. The exterior of the building was designed by Christopher Wren and he was helped by Nicholas Hawksmoor, and this started in the very late 1680s. But the inside came later, the entire building gradually covered with murals. The artist that was chosen was a man called James Thornhill, who was a relatively unknown English painter, and he started the hall in 1708 and it would take him over 19 years to complete. The main room is known as the Lower Hall and it shows William and Mary, who we've just mentioned, and look at them, they are equal. In fact, Mary might be slightly higher than William, reflecting the fact that she's the one with the royal blood. Now, William takes an olive branch, and this is a big symbol of the peace that he's brought to Europe. The couple are sitting on this sort of throne on top of crushed, overthrown figures, and we can see Catholic symbols like the bishop's hat or mitre, which are tumbling down around them. So all of this is a symbol of what became known as the Glorious Revolution, when William and Mary, these new Protestant rulers, came to England and overthrew the Catholic kings. Just to hammer home the point, you have a figure of Hercules with the biggest club I've ever seen, bashing anyone threatening revolution. Now, Mary had died in 1694 and William shortly after in 1702. So in fact, when this was being painted, both of these monarchs had passed away. But moving onwards, we go to the upper hall and we see some new monarchs in the line of succession. Above us are Queen Anne and her husband, Prince George of Denmark. And they're painted slightly smaller than William and Mary, but they're surrounded on four sides by images of the continents, by Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. And this establishes the idea of Britain's dominance and shows the ambitions of empire. Queen Anne had at least 17 pregnancies, but unfortunately none of her children survived into adulthood. As a result, there was a panic over the succession of a new monarch, and again we feared a Catholic takeover. So an Act of Parliament was passed, the Act of Settlement, to ensure a Protestant succession, and here we enter a new period of rule known as the Hanoverian Era. But not everyone is happy about this new king. He comes to England for the first time in 1714, and there were uprisings and riots. So just like we saw with William and Mary, the arts would play their part in convincing the public that the new king, King George I, was the right man for the job. So James Thornhill was instructed to paint these new monarchs into the hall and relay this smooth, peaceful transition of power. Sat in the centre is King George I, and he's dressed in silver. He's surrounded by his family in what's basically an impossible portrait given the ages of some of his relatives, and Thornhill has manipulated the scene. The grandchild that we see in red with his hand on the king's knee was actually 17 when this was painted and had never even been to England, but we're being told as members of the public that the succession is in safe hands. But the best bit is Thornhill painting in himself. The absolute cheek of it, so close to the royal family, gesturing to them pretty casually. Thornhill, in the early 1700s, was for a short time the most celebrated British artist who'd ever lived. He was knighted in 1720, and you may know that his other great commission was the interior dome of St Paul's Cathedral. A few years ago, the Painted Hall underwent a huge restoration work, so today we can amazingly see it with all the colour and vibrancy that we would have enjoyed when it first opened. So it's open to the public to visit, but occasionally you also get temporary exhibitions, and I wanted to share one of you, which sadly has now ended, but it is spectacular, so I wanted to give you a look. This is Gaia, a figure from Greek mythology representing Mother Nature, and it's by Luke Jerram. He used high-definition photography from NASA to recreate something called the overview effect, the idea of looking down on Earth from space. So unfortunately this is no longer here, but it is touring around the world, so it may be coming to a city closer to you. And this was the second time it was in Greenwich, so who knows, it might come back for a third time as well. But in any case, I hope this has inspired you to visit or perhaps revisit the Painted Hall, because it is well worth it. You can lie back and just gaze at this magnificent ceiling. So do let me know if you've been lucky enough to visit in the comments, and I will be back the week after next with more of London's hidden history.